Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Conversations from the Diaspora, a Building Africa's Future podcast. And as usual, I'm your host, your sister, and your friend, Nkiru. And today I'm joined by a special guest, the founder of Genii Games, Adebayo Adebembo. Correct? Did I say it correctly, sir?
That's fine. Adebayo Adegbembo. That's
Adegbembo, okay. Thank you so much, Brother Bayo, for joining us today. And could you just briefly introduce yourself to our listeners, where you're from, what you do, anything like that?
Okay, so it's my pleasure to join you. My full name is Adebayo Adegbembo. You can call me Bayo for short. I am the lead programmer at Genii Games. I basically work as a software developer. That's my full-time job. I also do the same thing for Genii Games, which is driven by passion and an interest in promoting native African languages. Basically, what Genii Games is about is, again, about promoting African languages. So we build mobile apps, electronic books, and also make videos to make African languages fun and interesting for kids and adult beginners to learn. I am from Nigeria. Yeah, so that's the intro. Was that too short, or do you want me to?
Oh, no,
any specific questions
no,
or
that's
help?
fine. I thought I'd lost you. No, thank you so much, for that intro. And, as we were talking, prior to the recording, I've been following your work for some time. And I really must, commend the progress that you've made in the past few years, since I've known your work and been familiar with it. So, many of us living in diaspora, we've been removed from our cultures in many ways. And what I mean by that is our languages, certain oral histories, and other elements of our cultures aren't being passed down in the way that maybe they have been in previous generations. So this, does potentially getting lost or significantly diluted in the next generation. So my quest for language study, or at least as it relates to, Igbo language, it actually started maybe late 2013, early 2014 when I traveled to Nigeria. It was my first time going to Nigeria after, I came here as a child at the age of 4, to the US at the age of 4. So my first time traveling on my own, back to my home country after 17 years of being, living abroad. So it was a different kind of world for me. Exploring the country, as I said, as an adult at that time and, seeing it from a different lens. So that's kind of when my personal quest for language study and culture study as it relates to Nigeria kind of started, I guess, if you want to say it that way. And I think that's a similar kind of sentiment for many of us who are, either were born in the, outside of the continent or came here as a child and, raised abroad. There's this longing to connect to the culture. And what better way to do that than through language? So just to kind of say all of that, I'm saying that to say, from your research and, through your work over the years, why is language study and cultural preservation important? And how did you get started in your work, particularly as it relates to Africa, African language and African cultural preservations?
Okay. So I guess so. Well, no, not I guess. Basically, I think it's a good thing that you pointed out the fact that your quest for sort of connecting with your identity started with languages, or language is your first point of call. And I think that's the primary thing for most people. I think when we think of our cultural identities, language is one of the first things that comes to mind. I'm a big I'm a big supporter of evolution of cultures. So certain cultural values for me have evolved. So there's certain practices that were known back in the days, were associated with different African cultures that have sort of evolved over time, and it's understandable. But language, interestingly, is not so much one of them. If anything, languages get diluted and stuff like that, but they don't necessarily evolve in the way that other traits, and when I say other traits, so certain practices, so for example, sacrifice, so human sacrifices for certain traditions, for example, those are those have been done away with, if there's any left in any of our cultures. So I guess that's where languages become very interesting. I think the fact that languages are sort of a lot more static, make them or make it a suitable first point of call for anyone looking to connect to their roots. So I think that's where languages come in. I also do in terms of my own experience also. So I mean, I was born in Nigeria. I mean, I was born and bred in Nigeria. Spent all my life in Nigeria, but I also hit a point where I started to see a difference between how I was raised and what the norm was becoming. So practically in 2011, 2012, my niece was born. And when she was born, I noticed that she wasn't going to be any different from much of the people or kids that I was that were growing up around me in the city, because everyone had sort of embraced, English, which is normal, as a language, but it was also at the expense of our native languages. When I was growing up in the 80s, and the way that I was raised by my parents and my grandparents, our local language was the first point of call, and it wasn't a deterrent for us to learn English, and it was funny because and it's something that I noticed, had changed over time, because arguments as of 2012 and to this point has sort of become one where it's an either or. So you're learning English, or you're learning your local language. And for some of these people, the argument is you're either one of them is at the expense of the other. But that wasn't the case when I was growing up. So what I wanted to do was sort of help my niece grow, with something that she could associate with, because my own older brother and, my sister-in-law were also in that age bracket, so they were among the new generation of parents who also fancied speaking English to their kids. So I wanted something different. So that was my motivation. I wanted to do something that would help promote and preserve the native language. For my niece primarily, that was, she was my first customer, and it sort of, it caught on, and it became something that I realized other people also had an interest in. So that's how I got started.
So, bro, I really appreciate the fact that you mentioned that your niece was like your first customer. I think that's really beautiful, because I think in whatever it is that we're doing, we have to kind of think with the future in mind. And I like the fact that she was like your inspiration for starting all of this. And there's another thing that you touched on that I think is very important. I actually wanted to ask you this towards the end, but since you kind of mentioned it now, I'll just kind of go into it briefly. There was an article that you posted on your blog, I think a few years back, titled "Our Cultural Heritage and External Validation." And one thing that you said just now that kind of made me think about that was this feeling of, okay, because I'm growing up in the city, a major city or something like that, I have to speak English, or, because I don't want to be looked at as too, quote, local, or, it's either, if I learn English, I'm going to somehow be seen as more sophisticated, and these other types of things that have, I think, historically held us back. And now many of us are suffering because, like, as we're kind of discussing, this disconnect with the culture and, specifically with the language, because like a lot of us may know like bits and pieces of the language, maybe can kind of have a very brief conversation, but eventually might switch back to English, or maybe even, pidgin English. Not too many can hold deep conversations. And by deep, I mean like, some of the films we watch when people are kind of speaking in idioms and all type of proverbs, like not too many people can hold these types of meaningful conversations in their native tongues, which is very unfortunate. So, and I know like with that article in particular, as far as like external validation, I think one of the things that you brought up was this sentiment of when we see outsiders, I guess, speaking our languages, we give them top praise, high praises, but for us, it's not, we don't see it the same way. Could you kind of talk a little bit more about that?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so thanks for mentioning that. I mean, you see, that article in itself was motivated by something that had been seen around me, especially online on social media, where, so if you wanted to go viral, for example, you can try, just search for a white person and say if he was in Igbo, for example, and then you begin to see not the white people, but it's usually us who then start, liking those videos and who are sort of fascinated, and it, it's a good thing, it's a good thing to see someone else, pick up your language and stuff. But I guess the major point of conflict or for me is when it really just highlights how much we sort of embrace things from outside in. And this is specifically for Nigeria, because I mean, that's the country that I'm very familiar with. There's not a deep sense of appreciation for what we have, until we see someone else on the outside, either speaking or seeing value in that stuff. And I think it's very obvious in so many things. You see how expensive, things that we don't pick interest in at home can be on the outside, whether it be, food items, whether it be clothing, you see how expensive they are. But back home, not a lot of people see value in them. So that external validation that I talked about is actually something that is a lot more, common, in our society, where, we just tend to not see value in what we own. And this is beyond just colonization now. It's also neocolonization. It's what we're also doing to ourselves. There's been this, sort of false narrative about our languages and our cultures, either being evil or local or native. And when I see those kind of arguments, the first thing that I think of is I think of the Chinese, for example, and how much they've embraced theirs, whether it's in the area of medicine or languages or anything. You can see how much value we place on those things. It's not so much different from what we have, because we have our own traditional medicines and the likes that we can actually, develop on or build on. But there's this false narrative where we don't see value in them. And at the end of the day, you go out there, to the outside world, whether it be America or Europe, and you find the same things, not just languages now, even things like, traditional items that we use for, food or clothing, or even, even a sponge for taking a bath, how expensive they can be, and sometimes it's not really something that I can explain, but that's why I feel like what needs to happen sometimes is a lot of us need to actually go outside and see how much what we don't think too much about are valued, even in our movies, even our musics. So even our traditional songs, or just contemporary, Afrobeat songs where people use one or two local words, or native words rather, to see how much value people place on those things, better than we do. So I think it's not just our languages, but it actually is a much bigger issue for most things about us. We don't tend to value what we have, until we either lose it or we go out there and we see how much value people place on them. And so in area of languages, for example, when I was starting out, one of the things that really used to fascinate me was with how much I put in so much effort trying to win over, fellow Nigerians. I thought that, what, this is a big issue for us, especially in the cities. Parents would embrace this, but I just, for whatever reason, and I kept on dismissing it. I kept on dismissing the fact that a good number of people who were showing more interest were actually Africans in the diaspora, who either hadn't been home in a long time, or weren't even, or just associated with the continent by way of their DNAs, from doing a test with African ancestry or any one of this related organization. They were showing more interest in my works, but I sort of was being dismissive. I kept on harping on the fact that, what, this is a problem for us locals. This is something that we need to embrace. And I basically was just forcing myself. And it took a while before I decided to, just, look the other way and focus on the people who pay more interest in this stuff. Exactly. And again, what I found from this was these people, they see the value, they understand the importance of an identity compared to those of us at home.
That's very both sad and powerful, and very true what you're saying. I was actually going to ask you that. Who would you say is your biggest, I guess, market? Would it be those in the diaspora or those on the continent? But you just said that those in the diaspora kind of seem to support you more in the language study and ventures. So I know, we just kind of briefly touched on this, but like, with the Afro beats and things of that nature, like you just said it as well, like, it's so funny how when outsiders, I guess, are showing the support, that's when we kind of decide, wow, okay, we have something here. Let's kind of continue. Because I've noticed, like, in the past 2 years, like, Afro beats, like we hear a lot over here in the diaspora, not just in our, diaspora communities, but even people outside of our communities are listening and enjoying our music and our culture and different things. So we really need to start appreciating ourselves more. As you said, we shouldn't wait for others to appreciate us before we start, I guess, to show that appreciation.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of going back to that a little bit, I know sometimes, kind of being from our culture, the things that are pushed are more of, the typical, I guess, medicine, sciences, and things of that nature. Like when you decided I want to go into this, like developing language apps and language study programs, how did your family see it? How did your, circle of friends see it? Like how did people, respond when you told them this is what you wanted to do?
So for me, it was I guess much of what I have right now, I owe to the support of organizations like the CoCreation Hub. So they're called CC Hub Nigeria. And I was fortunate when I started in 2011, 2012, I was fortunate to have come up on my idea at a point where technology hubs were beginning to spring up in the country. So CC Hub Nigeria, founded by two diaspora Nigerians, so British Nigerians, had decided, they had seen the future and decided, what, we can actually tackle problems on this continent by focusing on the application of technology. So they came to the country, I think in 2011, 2010, 2011-ish. And that was about the time that I was also starting out. So there was a lot of support at those points, so in terms of funding, because that's usually like the issue, right? Even your parents are concerned, oh, can you make a living from something like this? But I was fortunate in that I had hopped on the idea at a point where those technology hubs were beginning to spring up also. So the CC Hub gave me a good start because I don't know if I'd mentioned this before. I don't know if you know this. The way that Genii Games got started was we came out of a competition, which is in the tech space is called a hackathon. So a hackathon is basically basically like a marathon where you're trying to solve a problem, a defined problem within a particular sector or space. So in my case, it was a hackathon where they wanted to search for problems within the educational sector. And then they'll bring people together, so technologists and different people, different stakeholders, and then within 48 hours, just try to come up with innovative solutions. So in my case, what I had submitted as an idea was, this whole what eventually become Genii Games. What I had submitted was an idea around just helping to address what I found, what I felt was cultural, educative issues. So I basically just sort of built a context around that. So not your core educational problems in terms of literacy and stuff. For me, it was more of cultural literacy, more of learning our local languages, and I thought that it had an educational context to it. So that's the idea that I submitted. I went into the hackathon, and then we came second. We got funding, we got mentorship support, and that helped me get started, and that also opened the doors to other streams of funding for me, with which I built up the foundation of what Genii Games is today. So my parents were pretty supportive in the sense, because number one, I think if anything, they sort of understood that I was passionate about this. In terms of my friends also, I'd say a lot of them were supportive also, because this was sort of innovative to them in a sense. So I can't think of having felt any form of discouragement really from my close circles.
That's really good. And I think sometimes it just takes having people supporting you, because it's easy to, get distracted. You have a vision, and then maybe people are trying to say, well, that doesn't work in our cultural context. I'm really happy to hear that you had, that support. So could you just kind of like walk us through like what goes into the planning stage? Like how long does it take from start to finish to create the Yoruba and Igbo one-on-one apps before eventually, combining it to what it is today with the Ewe, Igbo, Kiswahili, Yoruba, Tree, and Wolof? Like how did you do all of this? Like from where it was when I first, found out about it to how you've, grown it to what it is today? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, I think for me, if anything, the key thing that I would point out is the fact that I'd say it's down to a growth mindset. Just always wanting to make things even better. But then it's not also just Bayo here, which is why I give a lot of credit. Which is why if you check any of the apps, you will find a credit page, and you will find all those different names that I mentioned who also contribute towards towards the development of this product. So in my case, it's really been an iterative process. I'm an avid learner, and I also like to just think out with stuff. I like to build stuff. I like to, it's my passion. It's something that I really enjoy. But then what Genii Games has also taught me is the need to also work with other people in different capacities. So in terms of the planning of it, first there's the idea, and then there's other things like, who can I work with in terms of, actually building the content, because that's where it actually starts from. I have to, in the case of Genii Games, for example, what I had to do was I had to first work with the people that taught me these languages. So like I mentioned, I was born in Nigeria, bred in Nigeria. In secondary school back home, I took Yoruba as a course. In my secondary school, Igbo was also taught. So you had the option of picking a local language or picking French, and you also had to sit for it at the I don't know if this is, I don't know what I'll call this now, but it's obvious when you walk to Nigeria. So something like a GCSE in the UK. So you have like this national exam that you take before getting into university. Or when you're through with, say, or the final stage of your high school or something like that. So you had to take any of those courses at that level also. So I studied Yoruba in school for 6 years, but because my school also had an Igbo teacher, I went with, so my school also had an Igbo teacher. When I started building Genii Games, I went back to my alma mater to, talk to my teacher, the guy who taught me Yoruba, and said, hey, I'm working on something like this. Would you like to contribute content towards it? So in the case of Genii Games, it's mainly been teachers, but it's also evolved over time to be just anyone who has a deep knowledge of our local languages. So you talk of Ave, you talk of Twi, you talk of Kiswahili. These are not teachers, but just speakers of these languages. Because again, it's also, as I talked about it being an iterative process for me, it's gone from being, the apps that Genii Games makes is not one where it's not the all in all when it comes to any of these languages. There's always going to be room for improvement in terms of corrections and stuff like that. But we're not bogged down with that. What we're actually interested in is anyone who has interest or who knows how to speak these native languages to help us build this content. And these same people help us vet it over and over again. So that's where it starts from. So there's the idea, and then there's the building of the content. And the building of the content is what takes me through finding the right people. So I've mentioned teachers. I've worked with teachers for Igbo, for Yoruba, for Twi and Kiswahili. When I felt that I had perfected the process well enough for Yoruba and Igbo, which were close to home for me, I decided to then take the same process, to try it out for other languages outside of Nigeria. So building of content is that phase. Then the next phase is actually the recording also. So the recording is also done by the same people who help build the content. So the teachers that I work with in terms of putting the content together, when I vet the content and I vet them against the standards that I have created, the teachers then go into the recording session. Sometimes they're just there to observe and then coordinate other people who are doing the recordings, who know how to pronounce the right words and everything. So we do that one. And then when we have all those assets in place, I then do the actual programming. But before that, there's the illustrations. The illustrations are not done by me also. I have a couple of go-to people that work on the illustrations also. And then the final bit is the programming, which is where I come in. And once that is done, I then have to give it back to the same people that I work with on the content to sort of vet what I have done. I also try to search for third parties who understand those languages to vet and give their opinions in case we have any corrections to make. And then it goes public. I don't know if that covers everything for you.
Wow, that's quite an impressive process. And I like the fact that you go back and forth just to make sure that everything is right, because it's one thing to kind of do your thing and then you see it and you think that it's good, but to have, the third party and for those who are, I guess proficient or, experts in their field to kind of look over it, that's a really beautiful thing that you have going there. So, I mean, how did you choose these languages and what languages do you plan on adding in the future?
Okay, so when I started out, it was easier for me to pick a language that I clearly understood. So Yoruba is my native language, and I've been speaking Yoruba since when I was born. So I'm quite proficient in Yoruba, but not as deep as some other people. Because I mean, the Yoruba that I speak, because I grew up in Lagos, right? The Yoruba that we mainly speak in Lagos is also very diluted.
Mm.
So it's not uncommon to find people from indigenous, people from the I don't want to say villages, but the core Yoruba speaking parts of the country.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon to find those ones speak, and then you don't understand some of the things that they're saying. So in my case, I just speak Yoruba because even if I get like a teacher, which is what I did in my case, I got a teacher. It was easier for me to sort of point out certain things also and sort of make certain corrections or ask certain questions, in certain areas because I understand the language, right? So
Mm.
Igbo also was also a close one for me to pick because again, it's a major language in Nigeria. I grew up around lots of Igbo speakers, and in terms of also finding resource persons, it was also easier. So I would say finding resource persons, I would say languages that are easier for me to find resource persons are usually my first point of call. And in Nigeria's case, it's the major languages. So Yoruba and Igbo, Hausa, we initially dabbled into, and then we sort of we left it, and then we're back to it now. We actually have the assets in place right now because we've just completed hours of recordings for Hausa. In
Okay.
terms of picking and in terms of picking the next languages, so I was, so I'd been nursing the idea of working on languages outside of Nigeria for a change. I was interested in Kiswahili, for example. This is a major African language that is popular amongst, East Africans and also in the
Yeah.
diaspora. So, but my challenge again was how do I find resource persons that I can work with? And that's where networks come into play. So I was fortunate in 2017 to be selected as a Mandela Washington Fellow. So I got to spend 6 weeks in Dartmouth, New Hampshire, with Africans with about with a group of Africans drawn from 19 different countries on the continent. So
Wow.
yeah, so and in my set and in 2017 Mandela Washington Fellows, I think there were about 1,000 of us drawn across different parts of the continent and spread across the US because it was a cultural exchange program. So
Was
what
that
that
the inaugural class? I think I remember hearing, was that when it first started, the inaugural?
No, so the inaugural one was I think in 2011. It was because it was an Obama initiative. I think the first cohorts were in 2011, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
No, what am I saying? I went in 2017. I think the first cohort were in 2014, 13-ish, if I'm
Okay.
not mistaken. Yeah, so what happened was, so what it did for me was it opened the doors to a wider network. In the first place, I was in an institution with people drawn from 19 different African countries. So when I wanted to work on TWI, for example, and AVE, I had a colleague who I had met through the fellowship who was from Ghana, and all he had to do was connect me with AWE and TWI speakers. So he was the project manager. He handled all of that. When I wanted to work on Kiswahili, I reached out to my coordinator one of my coordinators who's from Kenya, and then she helped me select someone from Tanzania, and that's who I worked with. When it was time to work on Wolof, which is a Senegalese language, one of the cohorts, one of the fellows who was from Senegal, who was in my institute and at Dartmouth, also connected me to a Wolof speaker who was also a Mandela Washington Fellow. So Yali sort of opened the door for me to get resource persons to work with on other languages. And that's what I'm basically building up on right now. So the Hausa language that we're going to be putting out very soon was also worked on or coordinated by another Mandela Washington Fellow from Nigeria who basically helped, find the right persons who could vet the content and do the recording. So it's really just a network of people. I reach out to one person connects me to the other person, and that's how it happens. Yeah.
Wow, that is really beautiful. And one of the many things that I admire about, your app and your platform is that it is beginner friendly. Like, it's great for kids and adults, on their language journey. So what are some of the maybe common reviews about your app that you've received?
I think like just like you mentioned is the sheer simplicity, and it's an interesting one because I mean initially there's a tendency to just want to create things that have all these bells and whistles, and yeah, you think you're a lot more sophisticated and stuff, but the sheer simplicity of this, which we made because we had kids in mind, it's what makes this really interesting for people who share feedback. And I guess another key thing from what I've seen, from what I've seen so far, in terms of feedback, is the originality. Again, there's also a tendency to want to make something like this and find someone who you think, sounds, very sophisticated and, not native and stuff. But that's not been the case for us. The primary thing in terms of identifying resource persons for our recordings are people who sound as original as possible, which some people would very funnily deem as native or local people. But that's what matters to us. So I think one of the key feedback that we've gotten is how original it is in terms of the pronunciations.
Exactly.
Nobody trying to make up any. There's nobody trying to sort of glamorize or change accents to make something sound a little more English or Western. Or there's none of that. In fact, the criteria for us in picking resource persons, be as original as you can, and that's been one of the feedback also besides the simplicity.
Yeah, that's very important. So, before I ask you the final question to kind of close us out, I want to know what are some of your hopes, for your platform, and in what ways have you, from your own personal opinion, exceeded your expectations and any personal goal that you may have held in the past?
Okay, I think the key thing for me is, and it's interesting that you asked me this question because like dreams evolve, especially as we grow. So when I started this right in 2011, 2012, I really was just passionate about putting this stuff out there, and I also wanted it to be my stepping stone into the outside world. I wanted to see the outside world. I wanted to see what was beyond, my space. So it was always fascinating for me when I started out, when I would wake up every other morning or almost every day, and I'd find like another email of a registered customer who's based in the US or based in London. These were places that I had never, I had never explored those places at then. All along it was just me, growing up in Lagos, checking out all the, just a few parts of the country of Nigeria. But what building Genii games and building these apps, what it did for me was it started to open up my mind into, a bigger world. And those initial dreams that I had were dreams where I could physically go to these places and connect with these people in persons, in these different parts of the world. And that's been exceeded, I'll be honest with you, to a large extent. So I've gone from, my corner or my corner of Lagos and doing my stuff to, to meeting my customers in different parts of the US, to meeting my customers from Germany to the UK to Brazil, to South Africa. And so in terms of that personal expectation, I've exceeded that. What it is at this point for me right now is, I'm also sort of evolving, right? And that evolution for me is, it's become more of, it's become a lot more personal with a family now, with a baby, and also living outside of the country. It's become a lot more personal for me. And it's also become for me a platform by which to sort of promote and preserve our native languages. If you go on Google and you search out resources on Igbo, for example, you won't find 1,000 of them. And that's why I think that there's a lot of room for people to come on board, especially people with interest in this stuff. I mean, write something, do something. I don't think we can have enough apps or have enough books or have enough videos or programs or any form of resources in our native languages. And that's how you promote and preserve your native languages. So I'm more than happy to keep doing this as a passion, and also as a business, because what it does for me is, if anything, I know that it's going to stand the test of time. It's always going to be there on the App Store, as long as I evolve, as long as it evolves with technology also, because there are also different evolutions in terms of technology and different standards, and so the app stores are also changing the standards. And for me, as long as we keep evolving this, as long as I keep adding new content, as long as I keep building new resources like the books that we have coming out soon, I think what it does for me is it lets me know that this something like this is being cemented as a way of documenting and preserving our native languages for the future generation, beyond me. So that's what it is for me at this point, and my hope is that it also continues to be, like an inspiration for other people. Like I mentioned, I mean, we can do with a lot more people building more, or culturally related apps, around our languages on the continent. And not just our languages, different aspects of our cultures, our histories and stuff. We have all these people who teaching online, who doing all sorts of things. So my hope is that it serves as an inspiration for people to do more stuff, and even for new people to come on board and exceed what I have done, do it in even better ways, and also, again, like I mentioned, we are also promoting and preserving what we have, and even more for me, highlighting the beauty of our local cultures, because our cultures are beautiful. They just need to be projected in ways that are appealing to people across the globe.
Exactly. Exactly. Brother Bayo, I really thank you, because what you just said was really powerful, and I really appreciate you for really highlighting that. Just really quickly, and then I'm going to ask my closing question, I promise. So outside of your apps, what recommendations do you have, for those of us who are in the diaspora, or even those who are living on the continent but somehow have been disconnected or removed from their, native cultures? What are some recommendations that you have for them to kind of reconnect, with the language, with the culture, or other, aspects of, who they are, as it relates to that part of themselves, outside of, your apps, but just on their own personal study, or any recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, recommendations on a general basis, right? I think that there should be complementary resources, especially things like in-person lessons. As it could be virtual also, but it helps to actually find a way to connect with people who can also teach one and communicate with one. I think that really helps. I think also embracing. I mean, even. I mean, our movies, songs, events like parties or weddings. I mean, there's this rave about Nigerian weddings. I mean, they all help out, because I mean, you get to learn one thing or the other. I mean, just learn something new about our cultures also. So, in terms of recommendations, I'd say generally, lessons are good. So virtual or one-on-one, in-person. Lessons. One thing that I do in terms, because I've been learning Igbo, and one of the things that I have done is so like join a WhatsApp group, where you get to communicate with people in Igbo. You ask questions, they correct you. I think those also help. So having groups that you can connect with, I think they help. Whether it be groups, with which you go for events or maybe watch movies together. I think they help. I think books are also very powerful. And books for me, it's not just about learning languages, but just even learning about your identity, just learning about your culture. So one of the things that I usually recommend to people on a general basis is, when people ask me about Nigeria, I recommend certain videos. I recommend certain videos that highlight our history, especially the political sides of things. And one of my best recommendations is a video. It's actually very popular on YouTube. It's called The Real Story of Nigeria. The Real Story of Nigeria. It was directed by a British Nigerian. It's a very, very, very enlightening video. Very enlightening documentary, I would say, because I think it's over an hour, but it helps you understand the country and the different cultures and the sort of tensions or even the issues that we have to this day. So not so much cultural, but on a general historical, political basis, but it actually does help. So I do recommend that to people because I think it also helps us in actually. So we're not just having or hearing some of these conversations about what Nigeria is or what the Igbos are or what the characteristics of the Yorubas are or the Hausas. We actually understand the dynamics at play from a historical point of view. So I recommend those documentaries. In terms of books, I think, again, like I mentioned, books are very powerful. I continue to read books on Nigeria because there is not one book that covers everything about, Nigeria. In fact, I do think that on any subject on Nigeria, you should find multiple resources. Some of my best ones are Why We Struck. Why We Struck talks about, so Why We Struck is actually chronicles the first coup that we had in Nigeria in the 60s, but it actually does touch on the historical, cultural part of the country also, which may be helpful, which will be helpful for anyone looking to actually learn more about their identity as a Nigerian. There's also the book by Chinua Achebe, which is There Was a Country. That's also one of my favorite books. Yeah. And I also enjoy. I'm a big fan of Chimamanda Adichie because her books, even though the fiction, they actually highlight several cultural nuances or events in the country that I can relate to. Mm-hmm. So Chimamanda, so Purple Hibiscus is one of my best. Americana is also a very relatable one, because it touches on certain aspects of the culture, or the country that I can relate with also. So Chimamanda's books are great. So those would be my recommendations beyond just, apps or languages. I think it helps to just learn more about the country as a whole, because if you're Igbo or you're Yoruba, for example, you must hear about certain tensions also amongst different ethnic groups, back home, and it helps to understand where you fit into this, especially from an identity point of view.
Wow. Thank you so much, Brother Bayo. Could you please just say a few words to our listeners, like how they can get in touch with you, how they can follow your work, if they have any maybe questions or would need any advice on maybe they want to get started? Could you say anything to them?
Yeah. So again, I'm always open to feedback. I read every review on the App Store, and I'm always looking for interesting people to work with. Like I mentioned, I'm always looking for people who just native languages. If you have a native language in mind and you have a resource person, if you have a native language that you would love to see Genii Games develop into an app or book or something, and you know good native speakers that we can work with. I'm always open to those recommendations. In terms of reaching out to me, you can easily reach me on via email. My email address is bayo@genigames.com. That's BAYO @GENIIGAMES.com, bayo@genigames.com, or you can just go to genigames.com and then fill the contact form there. You can also reach me or via Instagram. It's @Genii Games. I'm quite active on. I'm enjoying Instagram more than any other social media platform right now. So you can easily reach me on Instagram. It's @Genii Games, GENII Games. In terms of accessing our apps or books, just go on the genigames.com website or go on our Instagram page. The links are all there for you to access our different work on videos to books to apps. Yeah.
Thank you again. Could you say any kind of maybe greeting or well wishes in either Igbo or Yoruba for the listeners?
Yeah, sure. So so Yoruba first. That's my mother tongue. That's easier for me. So I would say. So one of our core greetings is when you see someone at any time of the day, you can easily just say "Ekushe," which is kind of like "well done," So it's like well done. So "Ekushe," that's in Yoruba, and then in Igbo, which is again a language that I'm still learning. Igbo, Dalu, I think that's kind of like well done, or greetings or hello. So or ndewo, so ndewo no, ndewo no, because I mean that's for multiple people. Yes. So and then Hausa, yes, so no, say hello. And then what other language do I know? So Kiswahili would be okay. Yeah. So I guess Karibu. Karibu.
Wow.
I think so. Karibu. And then what else? Senegalese Wolof will be Nanga Def. That how are you? And then
Wow.
what other languages in the Genii Games app? Because I should know. I should know a bit of every one of them. So Twi would be So Twi would be how do you say hello in Twi again? It's a say, which is how are you? And then what other language is there? So I've mentioned Wolof, mentioned Kiswahili, we mentioned Yoruba and Igbo. Ewe, which is also a Ghanaian language. How do you greet in Ewe again? I cannot remember. Yeah, I cannot remember that one. So those five should do. Ekushe, Yoruba, Dalunu, Igbo, Etisen, Twi, Nangadef, Wolof, and then the last one was Hausa, Sonu. Yeah.
Wow, amazing. Thank you so much, Brother Bayo. I really appreciate you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Hey, what's up, friends and family? My good people, my good brothers, and my good sisters. Happy October. How have you been? I know it's been a long time since you've heard from me, but I am back. What have you been up to? What are you looking forward to in these next few months until the year is over? Leave me a voice message or reach out on social media. I want to hear from you. You can email me at buildingafricasfuture@gmail.com. And you can also hit me up on social media using the same handle, @buildingafricasfuture. And if you like what we're doing, please consider supporting our podcast. All of that information can be found on the show notes. And remember, we are on 10 different platforms, so you can listen to this show wherever your favorite pods are cast. Thank you all so much for listening. And again, if you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with others. So until next time, my good family, be well.